My name is Ralph Connor. I'm the local legislation manager for the Heartland Institute. I'm also proud to be affiliated with CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality in Chicago. You're going to hear more about that later. I'm really glad to be here today, along with Mitra Noon, with the Citizens Alliance for Responsible Energy, to talk about economics and to talk about the role that global warming plays with economics and with the environment. And it's critical today for you to take a few moments to reflect on who you have as a panel today. We have some very distinguished individuals who have written extensively books, speeches, letters concerning the impact of global warming hysteria on economics and how this has a deleterious effect on poor people in America. You're going to hear a lot about that from these speakers. As the local legislation manager for the Heartland Institute, I've had many opportunities to review policy studies and books about the economics and public policy on the environment. And local governments can cause poor people to be impacted by high fees, such as mitigation taxes in New York. That's why it's so good for us to be in New York, because this is ground central for everything in addition to ground central. And so basically, we're proud to be in New York today to examine the morality and the spirituality behind the economics of so-called anthropogenic global warming. So your dream team today is the Salt and Pepper tag team of Mitra Noon and Ralph Connor. I'm going to stop there and introduce Mitra with the Citizens Alliance for Responsible Energy.
Thank you all. This panel is so important that for some reason it takes two of us to moderate this panel. But I truly believe that this is a very important panel. In fact, this whole track is very important because I believe that the economic impact of climate change, the economic and policy impact, is the window of opportunity that we have in the current economic climate to make an impact on the policies that are being made. A couple weeks ago, I had the opportunity to hear Patrick Moore, one of the founders of Greenpeace, speak, and he said that environmental extremists are on the downturn. This, too, is a window of opportunity for you. I hope that you will listen to our presenters today, that you will take notes, because when you take notes, you involve another sense in the learning process, and it will help you to retain the information that you're going to hear today, because it's important. I hope that each one of you will take it home, pay attention to what's being said, and take the message home. Do something about it. Don't just listen. Don't just take notes, but do something about it, because consumer awareness is a huge part of this battle that we are all waging. As a part of that, I'm pleased to introduce to you this morning Barun Mitra. Correct, Barun Mitra, sorry about that. And he is with us from India, hence the name that is difficult for we Caucasians to pronounce. But I've been honored to have some of my op-ed pieces presented on his website. And he is the president of the Liberty Institute in New Delhi, India. And he is with the Julian Simon Center. He is both an electrical and a marine engineer. And he is the greatest proponent of the new industrialized revolution in India. So I know you're going to enjoy him, and Ralph has an additional comment to add about our great next speaker.
We'd like to bring up Barun Mitra because he understands that powerful and influential elites are pushing a green crusade which punishes the poor. Most people in India, over there the government's spending more money on clean air to the detriment of clean water and clean sanitation. It's just lunacy. Mitra understands this. He also understands that Western aid to third world countries tends to help sustain a hurtful socialism, as he refers to it, and that government welfare creates professional aid seekers, and that this is all part and parcel of an international paternalistic top-down collectivism. We're glad to have Mr. Mitra with us today from the Liberty Institute because he is a champion of economic freedom and individual initiative. Join me in welcoming Barun Mitra.
Thank you very much. I mean, I was really, I didn't expect such an introduction, because I always try to begin by lowering your expectations. Because I come from a country where generally the expectations are on the lower side. And this afternoon, even my energy levels might be lower because I had to miss my lunch, because my presentation wouldn't open on my laptop, so I had to figure out another way to find the presentation back again and get it down. Actually, when I was told, I think Myron, it was from CEI, who suggested this topic to me, and I was wondering that why would I be asked to join a panel on the issue of morality and spirituality, because although I come from India, and perhaps because of that, these things are so steeped in that we hardly have much opportunity or occasion to think or debate spirituality and morality, because we just take them for granted. I mean, it's in our blood, and that's it. So what I thought I would try to do, I think this is share some thoughts with you, is not so much on the spirituality, but on ethics, as I would understand, and as I think a lot of others do understand. That is, the ethics that would be all-encompassing, particularly in terms of enhancing freedom of choice. Because ethics, in my view, would hardly be significant if freedom of choice that individuals can make is absent. It's the lack of choice that makes unethical behavior possible. Ethics is something that has to be a necessary condition, because without that, the race itself may not survive. And therefore, the aspect of choice is something, at least the way I understood ethics, is ingrained irrespective of which particular religion or denomination one might belong to. And economics, as I understand, particularly the market-oriented economics, is about choice. It's about enhancing choice for the consumer, enhancing choice for the customer. And therefore, I thought the running theme that I thought to try this afternoon would be this issue of freedom of choice, or how do we enhance choice. Of course, freedom to choose and freedom to learn from the choices that we make. This would be the basic of what I have to say, and I'll try to relate it to economics and economic efficiency and environment. The choice element of market economics, and probably my reason, coming from a country which did follow, because of its own domestic political reasons, pretty restricted economic policy for almost 50 years. And therefore, having lived through that time, for most Indians who have experienced the period between 1950 and 1990 in India, would all be able to recognize what lack of choice in economics does to individuals, to society. To individuals, it corrupts. To society, it impoverishes. Lack of choice in economics actually restrained ourselves. We ourselves in a way, shot ourselves on our feet. And the difference can be seen from what has happened in the last 10, 15 years in India, when India sought to reform its economy, enable the people to have a greater range of choices, and therefore have a much larger presence domestically as well as internationally. The choice, of course, induces, through trade or competition, induces innovation, generates productivity, which in turn helps in income and wealth. And income and wealth is at the core of our ability to make choices, because otherwise we don't have choices. And I'll soon show you a couple of examples on that. On efficiency, this was actually an original issue that I came into. In fact, I was just talking to Cal Besner here. I think I met him in 1995 or 96 in Agra at a conference. And I was introduced, or I was referred to him by Julian Simon, a guru of mine. And this is what actually I learned from Simon, that contrary or extremely counterintuitive it might be, but efficiency actually comes from consumption. If we cannot consume, we will have no incentive to make ourselves efficient. And in fact, just the other day when I was looking at, when I read the news that President Obama has nominated John Holdren as one of his scientific advisors, and what struck me was that I had heard that name before. So I Googled, and I found that in 1980, when Julian Simon offered the bet to anyone and was accepted by Paul Ehrlich and John Holdren, along with a third person, which said that the prices of metals or goods, particularly natural resources, would rise as world's population rises. Simon, of course, said that as population rises and consumption increases, efficiencies will outstrip the consumption levels, and therefore the prices would actually fall, which is extremely counterintuitive if you ask any man on the street. That how can you consume more? How can you eat your cake and have it too? But that's exactly what economics does. And that was a great lesson, and I was actually surprised that John Holdren would be nominated for such a high office, particularly at this time when the energy and the economic situation are not exactly in their best health. And therefore, a kind of illustration of this particular point is that if you look at any figure, any statistics, and last time when I had spoken at this conference, I had actually shown some figures on this. So I'm going to skip the figures, but the basic point is that in poorer countries, whether it's China, India, or any other developing country, the energy used per unit of goods produced, per unit of GDP, tends to be much higher than in a richer country. And this is precisely the point about efficiency. That you in this country or in the Western countries tend to consume much more energy. Yet, the per unit energy that you consume for every unit of GDP, it's much lower than what we do. And that is inefficiency. And therefore, this is just a list. You can expand the list the way you want, but this is just to point out this point that from lighting a fire to the lamps that are lighting up this room, what has changed and how and why? The key element that has changed is that heat has turned into light. And the impact or the consequence is increasing efficiency, and therefore you need much less energy to generate the same light that we would have needed if we had to light a fire to generate this amount of light. And this has happened precisely because consumption or demand for energy and lighting has increased. It has not happened in my country and many others where electricity is not taken for granted. Even in my capital where I stay, in Delhi, most of us have to rely on backup electricity system, generators or inverters, to back up when the power fails, because the power fails on a regular basis. And in many parts of India and other parts of the world, I know, where electricity is either non-existent, or even if the wires are present, there's nothing that flows through it. So it's still darkness. And in that situation, there is no choice, and there can be no expectation of improving efficiency. Now, while I was thinking on this, I thought I'll try to introduce and seek your comments. The man on the right, I don't know if you still recognize him. Yes, Ronald Reagan, the former president. And the woman on the left is a lady from southern Indian state of Tamil Nadu. And they're basically doing more or less the same thing. One is chopping, and one's carrying a headload of firewood to light her kitchen, to cook in her kitchen. What's the difference? What's the difference? Yeah? Exactly. That's the choice. That's power of choice. that Ronald Reagan didn't actually have to do what he's doing. He did it for many other reasons, but not necessity. It was not required of him to do this. His kitchen would have still been operational, or his heat in his house would have been working had he not chopped. The lady on the left has no such choice. That is the lesson. And if she doesn't have a choice, she would have no capacity, neither the incentive nor the ability, to actually improve on her efficiencies, on her energy needs. That is what lack of choice means to people, to a third of the population on this planet. So this is just, the one with those around the fire, trekkers from the west who's gone to Nepal. And incidentally, I don't know, some of you might know that we had a tragedy in Bombay, in Mumbai, in November 26/11, which a lot of Indians are referring to as India's 9/11, when a group of terrorists killed about 200 odd people. There was a candlelight march. I'm sure for you, candlelight marches are nothing new. But in India, candlelight marches are relatively new. This event attracted, or this tragedy attracted, a lot of attention, and a lot of Indians gathered a week after the tragedy to express their solidarity and light the candles. A friend of mine was there too in Mumbai that day. And she met a young boy who had come from interior India to the city, first generation to have moved to a larger city. And he couldn't understand why a candle. Because to him, a candle is a daily necessity in his house, because he has to light a candle 3 hours every day when the electricity fails in the house. So he couldn't understand that why would the elite in Bombay light a candle? Because candle was so unexceptional to him. It was the norm. But for those who are lighting the candle is a matter of choice. They don't have to light it. They don't depend on the candle. To me, this was perhaps the most telling instance of how diverse the planet that we live in, how diverse is my own country. And if we cannot take care or understand how some of the others, more unfortunate ones, are actually going through or living through and experiencing, I'm sure we will do a disservice to ourselves and to them. This is the same thing that I said earlier, that as consumption improved, the equipments kept improving. In India, if half the population do not have any reliable sources of energy or electricity, they're not going to think of which bulb to use. Yeah. You can't afford to think of which bulb to use. But it's here, in the richer world, that you can think of perhaps a dozen or 24 varieties of lighting equipment, because you consume so much, therefore you have the incentive to make it as efficient as you can think of. Same thing, how many of you have seen the film that bagged so many of the Oscars this year, The Slumdog Millionaire? Yeah, you have? Yeah, quite a few. In that movie, there's some very very stark portrayal of poverty in the slums of Mumbai. But one particular element struck me, and that was that a lot of people around the world, including in India, do not have the luxury of a toilet in their houses. It has, one could say, if you look at it, one could say that, do you really need a toilet in your house? You could go outdoors, and I don't know if any of you have lived in that kind of a situation. I did for 3 years in a very remote area in India. There was no toilet, there was no electricity, there was no piped water. And I know I survived because every weekend I could come home to Calcutta and have a clean bath and have a hot meal. But a lot of the villagers with whom I lived, they had no such option. You could think that their ecological footprint, so to say, were very small. They didn't need or they didn't have the pipes to supply the water. They didn't have the sewage connections needed to flush out the toilet. And therefore, their infrastructural needs were very limited. There was no electricity. And therefore, their energy footprint or the environmental footprint would have been very small compared to life here. For instance, the toilet paper, you have 50 types of toilet paper recently I read in some newspaper. And think of all the wood that's being used to produce that. And therefore, of course, the ecological footprint, so to say, would be, or should be, much bigger here. Think of it on the other side. This is a picture from the Slumdog Millionaire. So I thought for those of you who have seen it, one is the one on the left, on the right, is from the film. And the one on the left is not from the film, but from the star who acted in the film. That's the open sewage drain that flows past her house, and that's the place that she has to actually play in. And she came to Hollywood to receive her Oscars. So nature extracts a price, and that price can be quite heavy. The indoor air pollution that the lady is firewood uses is astronomical. 500,000 people die in India because of indoor air pollution. The waterborne diseases for lack of proper sanitation and water supply kills 5 million children under the age of 5 every year, and that's just in India. And therefore, if we ask the question that what good would the ecological footprint be if this is the price that people have to pay today? I'll probably try to skip some of those because this was the third example that I wanted to highlight. Again, Ronald Reagan riding a horse. This was a very common picture from those days. But this is reality today. You just drive out in any direction out of Delhi, you'll find this without, this is not an exceptional picture. It's the norm, and there is no choice for most of those who are actually in that situation. There is no choice. And this brings me to one of my last points, that this whole talk of consumption or consumerist society creating the problems of today, environmental or economic, can only come from people who take their consumption for granted. For those who cannot afford to consume, this is a luxury they'll never have. And the question would be that if you are going to try and demand that consumption be reduced, and the consequence of that would be, like I said, lack of choice, lack of efficiency, and a price that most of you in this room would be simply unwilling to pay. Growing consumption actually leads to shrinking of the ecological footprint. And like the examples that I gave are precisely of that kind. The hazards, like United States and the Western countries tend to be much more industrialized. Yet the environment here is much cleaner than anything I know at home. Why is that so? It's because poverty can be a much bigger pollutant and extract a price today. So what's the moral of my story? That if we divide poverty and prosperity or wealth, then we'll see that problems of poverty primarily deals with lack of consumption. Economically or socially or politically, that translate or that implies a political system that restricts competition. As a consequence, it lowers productivity. It leads to a harsher environment and lack of capacity to choose. That's on one side. On the other side, increased consumption and competition would stimulate higher productivity and cleaner environment, which is why you have more choices and I don't when I go back. So what's the challenge in climate? And this is what I think I should leave you with and hope you'll think about this. That if we are not concerned about the plight of the poor today and the problems of their present, then we can hardly expect the poor to be concerned about the future of the rich centuries or decades later. You know, for the poor, if they can't take care of the present, there will be no future for them. And we will be doing a great disservice to humanity if we sacrifice them for what we think to be our future decades or centuries later. The debate over climate change has a lot to do with keeping the poor in their place in the hope of securing the future for the rich. I think this is neither desirable nor possible. Most importantly, this is immoral. We cannot, we should not demand those who cannot have the luxury that you have to sacrifice their present for our tomorrow. That would be a most inhumane thing, in my view, to do. So, freedom of choice at the core, and because it's an energy and climate conference, and I'm really sorry that I didn't venture into the world of climate change, but I thought if I stay on the ground, I might make more sense than if I try to fly. Thank you very much.